What does Nintendo's track record of console release dates tell us about the likelihoods of when the next system will hit the shelves? In previous videos, I've covered economic considerations, manufacturing issues, and other factors that might cause the Switch successor to be earlier or later than expected, and my previous video on this channel deep dive patterns in the release dates of Nintendo's games over the last several years. However, this time I'm going deep into the release dates of the consoles. I found some quite interesting patterns. Why is one particular week a firm favourite, and why is the month of May a write-off? Make yourself comfortable for another Nintendo Forecast deep dive. First though, let me define the terms a bit. There are so many console versions out there, and some were incredibly niche, such as the mini versions of the NES, SNES, and even the Wii. So I'm counting obviously the main consoles and handhelds, Famicom to Switch, plus any of the less reputed but still significant entries in Nintendo's lineup, like Virtual Boy and the Color TV game, plus any significant add-ons or variants such as the Satellaview system and the Famicom Disk System, and yes, even the Super Game Boy, plus any major in-lifetime variants such as the Game Boy Pocket, the new 2DS XL, and so on. What I'm excluding are releases that took place after the console was effectively, or actually, withdrawn from the market, and specialist variations or just redressings. If I counted every 3DS variant, the next console will be out by the time the video is done. I'm also excluding more subtle variations such as the Super Game Boy 2, the Famicom Titler, or the 2019 Red Box revision of the original Switch. Finally, I am excluding regional variants such as the iQ player and concentrating only on those consoles sold in at least one territory out of Japan, North America, and Europe. I'm also counting the first releases, and these are nearly always the Japanese releases. It's not always the case. Both the Nintendo DS and the Wii hit North America a few weeks early at the end of November to scoop up those lovely pre-Thanksgiving sales, for example. In fact, the new 2DS XL, the last Nintendo console to date not to have a simultaneous global release, debuted in Australia and New Zealand 6 weeks before Japan, North America, and Europe. Generally speaking though, we're looking at the Japanese release windows. That gives us a slight bias in these numbers towards November, because where there are exceptions, it's because Nintendo has put a console out early in America to hit that Thanksgiving window. Although there are examples such as the DSi where Nintendo had a November release in Japan and the rest of the world had to wait until the following year. Of course, the days of staggered releases spreading over weeks or months, if not years, between territories are almost certainly long gone and not before time. This makes Nintendo's job a little harder in some respects, as it's surely much easier to focus on launching in one region at a time. Okay though, at the end of the whittling process I have, starting with the Color TV game in 1977 and finishing, for the time being at least, with the Switch OLED model in 2021, a count of 34 consoles released. It should be noted that for as long as Nintendo has been manufacturing systems, this is shaping up to be the longest gap Nintendo has ever gone without launching anything new. Let's just visualize this data in terms of months released, and here we see some interesting trends. First of all, it is true that October and November are more common release dates than others, especially over recent years, as the aim becomes to get new releases into the lucrative Christmas sales period in the West. However, February to April have been very common dates, as have June and July. If you look at just the mainline consoles, there is a much clearer bias towards November. The Super NES, DS, Wii, and Wii U were all November babies. Let's look at this then by console type. Handhelds, including all the Switch models, generally release fairly evenly across the year. Whereas if we look at the home consoles, which also include the Switch and Switch OLED, but not the Switch Lite as it doesn't dock, the release dates are far more geared toward the end of the year, with a notable spike in June, although since this includes 1977's Color TV game and the Super Game Boy, don't get too excited about any kind of June trend. It's interesting though that May is completely skipped. My hunch is that it's unlikely as a Switch 2 release date as well. You see, Japan celebrates Golden Week, a series of holidays in quick succession, at the end of April and the beginning of May. For Nintendo to ask its employees, hardworking as they are, to effectively have to work all through Golden Week to ready themselves for a launch soon after is a hard ask. However, the week before Golden Week means people will have time to buy and play a new console, and so that might be an ideal window to release their system in. Therefore, I would suggest that a week or so before Golden Week, mid to late April, is a better window for them than early May. I mean, they released a Satellaview right before Golden Week, but it was a Satellaview. Generally, I would rule out immediately before or a couple of weeks after Golden Week, especially when you consider what a frenetic period this is bound to be. The likelihoods of the Switch successor releasing pick up again towards the end of May. But there is one trend that does stand out to me from looking at this data. One date besides the pre-Thanksgiving slot that Nintendo really likes. It's a little hard to see it when you look at the data like this, but when you look at it like this, a bar chart showing consoles by weeks of the year, it's a little easier to see. We can see the Golden Week dip in there around week 19, and if we just look at the releases since 2000, we get an even clearer indication of how much they like one other particular date. Basically, this is the release week of the 2DS, new 3DS, and 3DS XL in consecutive years, and then also the release week of the Switch OLED in 2021. Why is week 41 of the year so popular with Nintendo, especially in recent years? I don't think it's fluke or superstition, but simply logistics. Time was Nintendo would be happy to dump their games in gluts, but especially in the Switch era, they have made a real effort to space out their releases. Occasionally they will release games in consecutive weeks. For example, Fire Emblem Warriors was released a little later in North America, Europe and Australia compared with Japan, and so it ended up coming out the week before Super Mario Odyssey. Similarly, the staggered digital then physical releases of Metroid Prime Remastered put it all up in the face of Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe and Bayonetta Origins Series of the Lost Demon. The last holiday season, they had just 2-week intervals between releases in a relatively packed period. Still, their default position is always a minimum of 3 weeks between titles, and releasing in week 41 therefore gives them space for a launch title, a secondary title, and a pre-Thanksgiving title, plus one more to round out the year in 3-week intervals, weeks 41, 44, 47 and 50. Clearly, the pre-Black Friday slot is another favourite as well, and this trend becomes even more apparent once you realise that the DS is only showing in week 48 and not week 47 because they decided that year to release on a Tuesday. The Super NES released on the 325th day of the year, as did the DSi, the Wii U released on the 323rd day, and the DS released on the 326th. But I guess it's not a huge surprise that the week before the biggest sales season of the year would be when they'd want to release a console. So let's use this information to work out the potential range of release dates for the next system. Evidently, current rumours are pointing to a reveal soon, but then rumours have pointed to an imminent reveal of a revised system since about 2018. I think these do have a lot more smoke than usual, but skepticism has to be the default with Nintendo. However, a reveal now would suggest April. Going back to my video responding to Furukawa's initial post about the sequel system back in May, my first gut feeling was in fact April, but let's see if we can get a better and more precise range. At this point, a reveal this fiscal year has to be pretty much ruled out, especially as Nintendo said not to expect one. So April is our earliest likely date. They could go crazy and do a March drop, but April seems like the 90% window to me. That's April onwards. There is a long history of Nintendo doing release in February, March and April, going back to the original Game Boy in April 1989. Working out the latest possible release date is another matter. The company is committed to announcement this fiscal year, and it strikes me that it would be very difficult for them to do any kind of reveal that doesn't at least set some kind of time frame. Then again, I'm reminded of the Tears of the Kingdom reveal. I once did an internet poll on the expected release window for Tears of the Kingdom. I was far more pessimistic than anyone else in the poll, and I was still too optimistic. I don't think at the time May 2023 was even showing up on the ones the person who posted the poll had listed. I say this only because it's important to be aware of your own biases when assessing all this. In a previous video, I noticed that the best time for Nintendo, at least with regard to mitigating the currency risk, would be to release their console pretty much straight away as soon as they can. But the second best time to do it will be to wait much longer until the currency situation is normalized. Instinctively, I thought this was a sign for a March to June release, but could they hold off longer? I think the language they would use in a reveal would be important if they wanted to delay a significant period. We will release in 2025 is very different from we will release in the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year, which is very different from we aim to release in the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year. The second I heard in the 2021 Direct a qualifier put on the 2022 release window for Tears of the Kingdom, my spidey sense told me that it would be very unlikely to make 2022, and I had already mentally prepared for a 2023 release long before that announcement actually dropped. By the time the delay was actually confirmed, the game was close enough anyway that it didn't ultimately make too much of a difference. People were still excited just to play it. If Nintendo really wished to push the Switch and squeeze every drop of life from it, they could probably do the same. They can't misrepresent things to investors, so their wording would have to be careful, but there's no reason not to keep the door open to an earlier release if everything goes right for them. I think suggestions of pushing the next system to the Switch's decennial in 2027 does feel too extreme to be believable though. The latest therefore will be 2026, but even that I don't think is at all likely at this point. Realistically, the question is whether they aim for the spring of next year or wait until the end of the year. If they do target holiday 2025, two preeminent dates stand out. One is the 40th anniversary of Super Mario Bros. In September, and the other is their favourite release week, the release week of the OLED and the multiple 3DS revisions in October. Meanwhile, if they're going for a spring release, given the huge hype cycle this game will have, I struggle to see they can do much better than April. Easter in 2025 is notably late as well. Easter Sunday is the 20th of April, and the chance to have a game out during the Easter weekend and during the Japanese Golden Week period to follow has to be a very compelling proposition for Nintendo. Nintendo very rarely goes for early dates in the month for its releases. The Switch was a relatively rare exception. Even with their games lists, they tend to favour mid-month launches very often, and of course, it seems almost perverse to launch a new system just a few days into a new fiscal year when they could have just as easily got credit for it with investors in the previous financial year by moving it forward a few days. Therefore, at this point, I would favour the 17th of April if they wanted a bit before Easter, or the 24th of April if they're happy for that long weekend to be a Nintendo weekend. These dates are before Easter, before Golden Week, after a few weeks have passed into April. They're a Thursday, assuming Nintendo keeps its current Thursday release schedule. All told, these kinds of dates I feel have a lot to recommend them. At any rate, late April, mid-September and early October do seem to be the prime release date windows, with the possibility still of something in June. But where do you see the new machine landing? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't seen my deep dive on how Nintendo schedules their actual games, then you really need to check out that video right here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.